The birthday cake was still warm in my hands when my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "Pack your bags, old hag. From today on, you're not living with us anymore." My son David just nodded along like one of those dashboard bobbleheads and didn't say a single word. So I stepped outside, made one phone call, and exactly 1 hour later, that woman was the one without a place to live. If you're reading this, please hit the like button and tell me in the comments where you're reading from. I love connecting with people who truly understand family drama. But let me rewind a bit and explain how we got to that incredibly satisfying moment of justice. Because trust me, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 3 years ago, I was Margaret Thompson, 65 years old, newly widowed, and sitting in my lawyer's office, convinced my life was over. My Robert had been gone for 6 months, and the loneliness was eating away at me like termites in old wood. Every day felt heavier than the last. That's when my son David called, offering what sounded like a lifeline. "Mom, Jessica and I have been talking," he said, using that careful tone he always had when he wanted something. "Why don't you come live with us? Tyler would love having Grandma around, and we could all help each other out." I should have known better. Jessica had never liked me, not from the very beginning. Not since David brought her home 15 years earlier with her perfectly straight blonde hair and that habit of turning every sentence into a question, even when it wasn't one. "So, Margaret, you're really going to wear that to the restaurant, but grief makes you foolish." And at that point, I was drowning in it. My house felt too big, too quiet, too filled with memories that sliced into me like broken glass every time I turned a corner. So I said yes. Looking back now, I realized that was exactly what she was counting on. The first few months weren't awful. Tyler was 5 then, all gap-toothed smiles and non-stop energy, and he genuinely seemed happy to have me there. David worked long hours at his accounting firm. Jessica worked part-time at a boutique downtown. I naturally slipped into the role of live-in babysitter and housekeeper, and, honestly, at first I didn't mind. Staying busy helped ease the grief, and Tyler was a sweet, loving child. But Jessica had a special talent for making even my kindness feel like an offense. "Oh, Margaret, you didn't have to reorganize my spice cabinet," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I already had a system." Or, "I appreciate you doing Tyler's laundry, but could you maybe not use so much fabric softener? That's just not how we usually do things." It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each comment was small enough that complaining would have made me seem petty. But together, they built a wall between us, taller than the Berlin Wall. David, bless his completely oblivious heart, never noticed. He'd come home exhausted, kiss Jessica hello, ruffle Tyler's hair, give me a quick hug, then disappear into his home office or collapse in front of the TV. As far as he was concerned, family harmony had been achieved. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real trouble began when Jessica realized something that changed everything. The thing about living with someone is that eventually, their true colors start to bleed through, like cheap dye in hot water. For Jessica, that bleeding started about 6 months after I moved in. That at first, it was subtle. She'd forget to tell me about Tyler's school events until the last minute, then act shocked when I couldn't attend. She'd cook dinner for 3 and look genuinely surprised when I walked into the kitchen. "Oh, I thought you were eating with your book club tonight." I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what she was doing, but Robert had raised David to avoid conflict at all costs, and confronting Jessica would have put my son right in the middle. So I swallowed my pride and tried to make myself smaller, hoping she'd eventually soften toward me. That was the biggest mistake of my life. You see, Jessica wasn't just cold, she was strategic. Every act of casual cruelty was carefully designed to make me feel unwelcome without giving me anything concrete to complain about. She was building a case, collecting evidence for a verdict she'd already decided. The first major incident happened at Tyler's 6th birthday party. I'd spent the entire morning decorating, baking his favorite chocolate chip cookies from scratch, and wrapping the bicycle I'd bought him. When the guests arrived, Jessica swooped in like a vulture. "Oh, how sweet that Grandma tried to help," she announced to the other mothers, loud enough for me to hear, though we probably should have coordinated better. And that was just the beginning. "I'm just worried the cookies might be too sweet for the children," she said, wearing that perfectly passive-aggressive smile, the kind that made the other mothers nod sympathetically while I stood there holding my plate of cookies like an idiot. Later, I watched those same cookies disappear faster than evidence at a crime scene. But by then, the damage was already done. David missed all of it. He was out back setting up the bounce house, completely oblivious to his wife's masterclass in social assassination. That night, after Tyler was asleep and David was snoring, I lay in my guest room staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become a stranger in what was supposed to be my new home. The walls felt like they were closing, in partly because the room was barely bigger than a closet, but mostly because I no longer felt like I belonged anywhere. The worst part wasn't even Jessica's behavior, it was watching my son turn into someone I didn't recognize. The David I first raised would never have allowed anyone to treat his mother the way Jessica treated me. This version of David just smiled, nodded, and kept the peace at any cost. That's when I started making plans to leave. I thought about getting a small apartment closer to downtown, somewhere I could rebuild some kind of life. I had the money. Robert had been a successful lawyer, and we'd been smart with our savings. I didn't need to depend on anyone. But then Tyler got sick, pneumonia, and needed round-the-clock care. Jessica couldn't take time off work. David was buried in tax season. Suddenly, I wasn't the unwanted house guest anymore. I was essential. For 2 weeks, I barely left Tyler's side. I made him soup, read him stories, checked his temperature, and slept in a chair next to his bed. When he finally turned the corner, the first thing he said was, "Don't leave, Grandma. I need you here." How could I walk away after that? So I stayed. And Jessica's resentment grew like mold in a damp basement. She had found the perfect setup, a live-in babysitter and housekeeper who paid rent and couldn't push back. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't nearly as helpless as I looked. By the second year, Jessica's mask really started slipping. With Tyler in first grade and her confidence growing, she stopped pretending I was family and started treating me like hired help who forgot her place. "Margaret, could you pick up my dry cleaning? I'm running late for book club." Not a request, a command delivered. While she inspected her manicure, the guest bathroom could use a deep clean. "I noticed some soap scum when my mother visited last week," said with a smile cold enough to freeze hell over. "Tyler's teacher wants to meet with his parents about his reading level. David and I will handle it, of course." The way she said it made it clear. I no longer counted as family. Each slight was carefully designed to remind me exactly where I stood. I was useful when they needed something, invisible when they didn't. And always expendable. The smart thing would have been to leave then, pack my bags, find my own place, and let them figure out their childcare problems on their own. But Tyler was thriving with me there. And I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning him to become a latchkey kid at 6 years old. And besides, I was starting to understand something important about Jessica. For all her calculated cruelty, she had one massive blind spot. She assumed everyone was as shallow and petty as she was. She looked at me and saw a grieving widow with nowhere else to go. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. Robert hadn't been just any lawyer. He'd been one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. For 37 years, I'd sat beside him at client dinners, business meetings, and strategy sessions. I'd absorbed more about property law, contracts, and financial leverage than most people learn in business school. But Jessica only saw what she wanted to see, a lonely old woman desperate for family connection. It was almost insulting how badly she underestimated me. The breaking point came during Tyler's school Christmas play. I'd helped him practice his lines for weeks, listened to him sing Silent Night in the bathtub until I could recite it backward, and bought him the most adorable little shepherd costume you've ever seen. The night of the performance, I was getting ready when Jessica appeared in my doorway. "Actually, Margaret, we won't have room in the car for you tonight. David's parents are coming, and it's really more of an immediate family thing." She delivered the news while filing her nails, never even looking at me. And that's when I felt something cold settle deep in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. That would come later. This was something sharper, cleaner. "Recognition, I see," I said quietly. "Well, I hope Tyler does well." "Oh, I'm sure he will. He's been practicing so hard." She finally looked up, and I saw the satisfaction in her eyes. She thought she'd won something. Some small, cruel victory. Poor Jessica. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. That night, while they were at the play, the very one I'd helped Tyler prepare for, I sat alone in my room and made a decision. I was done being the grateful charity case. Done being treated like hired help. Done watching my son choose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. It was time to remind everyone exactly who Margaret Thompson really was. Tyler's 8th birthday was supposed to be special. I'd been planning it for weeks, quietly coordinating with David about themes, guest lists, and whether we should hire a clown or a magician. Tyler had begged for a superhero party costumes, a shield-shaped cake, the whole thing. Can we invite my whole class, Grandma? And can you make those little sandwiches with the crusts cut off? And can we do superhero training in the backyard? I said yes to everything. Of course I did. What grandmother could resist those big brown eyes and that gap-toothed grin? I'd already ordered the decorations, planned the menu, and even found a costume rental place that could provide capes for every kid. Then, 3 days before the party, Jessica dropped her bombshell. We've decided to have Tyler's party at Chuck E. Cheese instead, she announced over breakfast, never looking up from her phone. It's just easier than dealing with all the cleanup here. David nodded along like the bobblehead he'd become. Yeah, Mom, it'll be less work for everyone. You can just relax and enjoy yourself. Tyler looked confused, but Grandma already ordered the superhero stuff. And she was going to make her special chocolate cake. Chuck E. Cheese has perfectly good cake, sweetheart, Jessica said in that sugary voice she used when other people were listening. And they have games. It'll be way more fun than a boring home party. I watched my grandson's face fall. This was the same child who'd been drawing pictures of his superhero party for weeks, who'd practiced his training course in the backyard until he could run it with his eyes closed. But Jessica had decided, and David wasn't going to fight her. That's fine, I said calmly, cutting my toast into neat little squares. I'm sure Tyler will have a wonderful time. Jessica shot me a sharp look, probably expecting a fight, but I'd learned my lesson about picking battles I couldn't win. This one, I'd win differently. Actually, I continued, I was thinking of taking a little trip that weekend anyway. Visiting my sister in Portland. I haven't seen Helen in months. A complete lie. Helen lived in Florida, and we talked twice a year. But I needed a reason to be gone when Jessica's perfectly planned party inevitably unraveled. Jessica looked almost disappointed. Well, if that's what you want to do. What I wanted to do was shake my son until his brain rattled back into place. Instead, I smiled and asked if anyone wanted more coffee. The morning of Tyler's birthday, I was up early making pancakes shaped like superhero symbols when Tyler shuffled into the kitchen in his pajamas. Morning, birthday boy, I said, flipping a Batman pancake onto his plate. 8 years old. Can you believe it? He climbed onto a stool and poked at the pancake with his fork. Grandma, are you really going to miss my party? My heart cracked straight down the middle. Oh, sweetie, I'm not missing it, I said gently. I'll be thinking about you all day, and I want you to tell me about every single game you play, okay? But it won't be the same without you there. His voice was so small it nearly broke me. I knelt beside his stool and took his hands in mine. Tyler, listen to me. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make much sense. But no matter what happens, no matter where I am, I will always, always love you. Do you understand? He nodded solemnly, and I kissed his forehead. Then I went upstairs and packed my overnight bag, even though I had no intention of going anywhere. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people get exactly what they ask for. The real party was scheduled to start at 2 o'clock. By noon, I was fully packed and ready for my fictional trip to Portland, suitcase by the door. Printed MapQuest directions laid neatly on the kitchen counter, and everything was exactly where it needed to be. Jessica was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to get Tyler ready while coordinating pickup times with the other parents. David, did you remember to confirm the reservation? We need to leave by 1:30 if we want to get there before the other kids. Tyler, please go brush your teeth and put on your good shirt. I watched the chaos from my seat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and reading the newspaper like I didn't have a care in the world. Inside, I was counting down the minutes. At 12:30, my phone rang. Is this Mrs. Thompson? This is Cheryl from Chuck E. Cheese. I'm so sorry to call at the last minute, but we've had a kitchen fire and will be closed for the rest of the weekend. I carefully arranged my face into one of polite concern, while Jessica turned 3 different shades of pale. Oh my goodness, I said. Is everyone okay? Everyone's fine, thank you. We tried calling the number on the reservation, but it went straight to voicemail. I glanced at David, who was frantically checking his phone. Dead battery, he muttered. Jessica began to spiral. But what are we supposed to do? The kids will be here in an hour. I already told all the parents. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I said gently, standing up and checking my watch. I really should get on the road before traffic gets bad. But Mom, we need help, David said, genuine panic in his voice. Can't you postpone your trip? I tilted my head, as if seriously considering it. Well, I suppose I could call Helen and reschedule. Jessica's jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. She knew she needed me, but asking meant admitting that all her careful planning had fallen apart. Pride and desperation battled across her face like a nature documentary. Finally, Tyler made the decision for her. Please don't go, Grandma. We can still have the superhero party, right? You still have all the decorations. And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Oh, sweetheart. I don't know, I said softly. Your mom and dad already decided on Chuck E. Cheese. I wouldn't want to interfere with their plans. Jessica looked like she was swallowing glass. Maybe we could combine both ideas, she said through clenched teeth. Have the party here, but still make it fun, like Chuck E. Cheese. I pretended to think it over. I suppose that could work, although we'd need to redecorate everything. I'd have to bake the cake from scratch, and we'd need activities for 12 8-year-olds, with about 30 minutes notice. Can you do it? David asked, hope flickering in his eyes. I smiled at my son, really smiled for the first time in months. David, honey, I've been throwing parties since before you were born. The question isn't whether I can do it. The question is whether you want me to. Boff. What followed was the most satisfying hour of my life, while Jessica stood frozen in the corner, doing her best not to have a nervous breakdown. I turned their sterile, modern living room into superhero headquarters. I had David hanging streamers while I whipped up a 3-layer chocolate cake with buttercream frosting. Tyler helped me set up the obstacle course in the backyard, chattering nonstop about how this was going to be the best party ever. By the time the first kids arrived, you'd never have guessed the whole thing was thrown together at the last minute. The house looked incredible. The cake was perfect, and Tyler was practically glowing with excitement. But Jessica's humiliation was only just beginning. As parents dropped off their kids, they kept complimenting the decorations, asking for my cake recipe, and telling Tyler how lucky he was to have such a creative grandmother. Jessica stood there with a tight smile, accepting praise for a party she had nearly destroyed. This is incredible, Tyler's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, said. You must have been planning this for weeks. Oh, well, it was really a team effort, Jessica managed, while I bit back a laugh. The real moment came when Tyler blew out his candles. Instead of wishing for toys or games, he stood up on his chair and announced to the entire room, I wish my grandma could live with us forever and ever, because she makes everything better. The room burst into applause from the other parents, and Tyler launched himself into my arms for the biggest hug of his life. Over his shoulder, I caught Jessica's eye. She looked like she wanted to murder me. Perfect. The party was a complete success. Tyler shone like a little light bulb for hours, racing around in his cape and showing off his superhero training course to anyone who would watch. The other kids had an absolute blast, and the parents couldn't stop raving about the decorations, the activities, and especially the homemade cake. Even David seemed to remember why he used to be proud of his mother. But with every compliment I received, Jessica's mood darkened. Your mother-in-law is amazing, I heard one mom say to her. Tyler is so lucky to have her. Margaret really outdid herself, said another. This is so much better than Chuck E. Cheese. By the time the last guest left, Jessica was practically vibrating with rage. She'd spent the entire party watching me get credit for saving the day she'd nearly ruined, and it was eating her alive. Tyler was exhausted but happy, curled up on the couch with his pile of presents, while David cleaned up cups and plates. I was boxing up leftover cake when Jessica finally cornered me in the kitchen. That was quite a performance, she said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. I looked up from my Tupperware, genuinely confused. I'm sorry, don't play innocent with me. Margaret, you orchestrated this whole thing, the Chuck E. Cheese cancellation, the last-minute party, playing the hero grandmother. Her voice was low and vicious. I don't know how you did it, but I know you did. I set the cake box down and met her gaze calmly. Jessica, are you suggesting I somehow caused a kitchen fire at a children's restaurant just to make you look bad? When she heard it out loud, it sounded ridiculous, but by then, Jessica was beyond rational thought. I'm saying you've been playing games since the day you moved in, she snapped, acting helpless and grateful while slowly turning my family against me. Your family. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Yes, my family, she shot back. David is my husband. Tyler is my son. And this is my house. You're just the guest who forgot when to leave. Something cold and sharp settled behind my ribs. I'd endured a lot over the past 3 years, the casual cruelty, the deliberate exclusion, the constant reminders of my place in the household hierarchy. But calling Tyler her son was a line I hadn't even known existed until she crossed it. You're right, I said softly. This is your house. And you're absolutely right that I've forgotten my place. Jessica looked surprised by my sudden agreement, but she pushed forward. I'm glad we understand each other, she said, because honestly, Margaret, it's time we all faced facts. You've been here 3 years now, and it's not working. You need your own space, your own life. It's not healthy for any of us to keep pretending this arrangement is permanent. I nodded thoughtfully, wiping the counter in slow, deliberate strokes. You know what, Jessica? You're absolutely right. It's time I stopped pretending. Relief washed over her face. She clearly thought she'd finally worn me down. I'm so glad you see it that way, she said. We can start looking at apartments for you next week, help you get settled somewhere nice. Oh, I don't think that will be necessary, I said, hanging up the dish towel. I already know exactly where I'm going to live. Something in my tone made her pause. Where? I smiled at her, really smiled, the kind of smile I used to give opposing counsel when I knew they were already cornered. Right here. Her face went blank. What do you mean, right here? I just told you, Jessica, sweetie, I said, my voice smooth as silk. There's something I should probably mention. When David and Tyler and I were planning this party, we talked about a lot of things, including some interesting facts about property ownership. I leaned back against the counter, calm and unhurried. You know, when Chuck E. Cheese called about that kitchen fire, I was as shocked as anyone. What are the odds? But sometimes the universe has a very specific sense of timing. The color started draining from her face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that this house, the beautiful house you love so much, doesn't actually belong to you. I let the words settle. It's mine. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could almost see the gears spinning in her head, struggling to process what I'd just said. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? I said gently. When Robert died, I inherited several properties. This house was one of them. I've been letting you and David live here rent-free for the past 5 years. Ever since you got married, I thought it was a nice wedding gift. I paused, letting that sink in. But lately, I'm starting to think I've been far too generous. Her hands were shaking now. David never said. David doesn't know, I interrupted. The deed is held in a trust Robert set up, managed by his old law firm. I never mentioned it because I never imagined I'd need to. I straightened, and something in my posture must have changed because Jessica actually took a step back. But you know what, Jessica? I continued calmly. After today's little heart-to-heart, I think it's time we cleared up a few things about whose house this really is. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. Finally, she managed to choke out, "You're lying." I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Let's find out, shall we? And that was the moment I made the phone call that changed everything. The phone rang twice before. Robert's old law partner answered. Mitchell, Harrison and Associates. This is James Mitchell. James, it's Margaret Thompson. I hope I'm not calling too late. Margaret, never too late for you. How are you holding up, dear? I kept my eyes on Jessica, who stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen like a deer caught in headlights. I'm doing very well, actually. Listen, I need you to send over the ownership documents for the Maple Street property tonight, if possible. The Maple Street house, of course. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect. I just need to clarify some property rights for my family. You know how these things can get complicated. Jessica's face went from pale to green. She was finally realizing this wasn't some elaborate bluff. I'll email the documents within the hour, James said. Do you need anything else? Yes, the current deed and the trust documentation. Oh, and James, could you also include the rental market analysis you prepared last month? I'm considering making some changes to the property management. Jessica actually swayed on her feet. Market analysis meant I was serious. Market analysis meant eviction notices, moving trucks, and the complete collapse of her perfectly controlled little world. Absolutely, James replied. I'll include comparable properties in the area. You should know, Margaret, the house has appreciated significantly since Robert's passing. You could command quite a premium in today's market. That's excellent news. Thank you, James. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket, never once breaking eye contact with Jessica. She stared at me like I'd grown horns and a tail. You can't do this, she whispered. Actually, I can do whatever I want, I said calmly. It's my house. I began loading dirty plates into the dishwasher, humming softly. But don't worry, Jessica, I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you 30 days notice, just like any other tenant. 30 days, her voice cracked. But we have nowhere to go. David's job, Tyler's school. You probably should have thought about that before you tried to kick me out of my own home. I paused, holding a plate up to the light to check for spots. What was it you said earlier? Pack your bags, old hag. Such charming language for a lady. That was when David walked into the kitchen, Tyler trailing behind him with chocolate cake smeared across his chin. Mom, David said warmly, thank you again for saving the day. That was incredible. He wrapped me in a hug that felt genuine for the first time in months. I don't know what we would have done without you. I patted his back gently. Oh, sweetheart, you would have figured something out. You always do. Jessica stared at us with wild eyes, clearly trying to calculate how she was going to explain to her husband that they were about to be homeless. But I wasn't finished yet. David, I said sweetly, could you take Tyler upstairs and get him ready for his bath? All that cake and running around, he needs a good scrub before bed. Sure thing. Come on, birthday boy, let's get you cleaned up. Once they were gone, I turned back to Jessica with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Now then, I said softly, where were we? She finally found her voice somewhere between fury and panic. You evil witch, you've been planning this all along, haven't you? I laughed, actually laughed. The irony was just too delicious. Planning what, exactly? I asked. Planning to be treated with basic human decency in my own home. Planning not to be called an old hag on my grandson's birthday. I tilted my head. Honey, if that's evil planning, then I'm guilty as charged. David, we'll never let you do this, she hissed. When he finds out what? I said calmly. That his mother owns the house he's lived in rent-free for 5 years. That she's been financially supporting his family while his wife treated her like garbage. I closed the dishwasher with a soft click. Oh, I think David is going to be very interested in this conversation. Jessica's whole body was shaking now. You don't understand, she whispered. We can't move. David's building his practice here. Tyler has friends. We have a life. Had a life, I corrected gently. Past tense. You destroyed it yourself. About 20 minutes ago, right around the time you decided to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Jessica snapped into full panic. She grabbed my arm with both hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. Please, she whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. We can work this out. I looked down at her hands, gripping my arm, then back up at her face. Let go of me, Jessica. She dropped her hands like I'd burned her. Just as David walked back into the kitchen. Tyler's in the bath, he said, then stopped when he saw our faces. Is everything okay? You both look. We're fine. Jessica cut in quickly. Just talking about some household stuff. David glanced between us, clearly suspicious. He might have missed the daily warfare happening in his own home, but he wasn't stupid. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Actually, David, I said casually, I was just telling Jessica about some paperwork I received today from James Mitchell regarding this house. Paperwork. David frowned. What kind of paperwork? Jessica made a small, broken sound like a wounded animal, but I ignored her. Property documents, deed transfers, trust information, that sort of thing. Turns out there were some details about this house we never really talked about. What details? I pulled out my phone and showed him the email that had just arrived from James. Why don't you read it for yourself? David took the phone and started scrolling. I watched his expression shift: confusion, then surprise, then something close to embarrassment. Mom, he said slowly, this says you own this house. I do, but how is that possible? Jessica and I bought this house when we got married. I tilted my head. Do you have a mortgage? Did you sign closing papers? David's mouth opened and closed a few times. I mean, the down payment came from you. But I thought Jessica handled all the finances, the insurance, the paperwork, everything. She said it was easier since she worked part-time. He turned to his wife. She had backed herself up against the refrigerator like she was trying to disappear into it. Jessica, he asked quietly, what's going on here? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? That she'd known all along they were living in my house. That she'd treated the actual homeowner like an unwelcome guest for 3 years. That she'd just tried to throw me out of my own property. The truth is, David, I said gently, when you and Jessica got engaged, Your father and I wanted to help you start your marriage on solid ground. So we bought this house as a wedding gift. The deed was placed into a trust to simplify the tax side of things. A wedding gift, David repeated slowly. We knew you'd never accept it if we just handed you the keys, I continued. So we let you believe you were buying it yourselves. We paid the down payment, the closing costs, everything. And the mortgage payments you've been making, they've been going into a savings account for Tyler's college fund. David sank into one of the kitchen chairs like his strings had been cut. My God, he murmured. All this time, you've been living in your mother's house, I finished. He snapped his head up. Which brings us to what? To tonight's conversation, I said, smiling at my son, with all the love I'd been holding back for 3 years. The one where Jessica told me to pack my bags and get out on your son's birthday in my own home. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the dishwasher switching into its rinse cycle. David looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the very first time and didn't like what he saw. Jessica, he said quietly, please tell me you didn't actually say that. And that's when Jessica made the biggest mistake of her life. Instead of apologizing, of showing even a shred of remorse, she attacked. You dare sit there and judge me, David. I've been dealing with your mother undermining me for 3 years. She walked in here and took over everything, my kitchen, my house, my son, your son. David's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You know what I mean? She acts like Tyler belongs more to her than to me. She's always swooping in to save the day, making me look incompetent in my own home. Her home, David corrected sharply. I didn't know that, Jessica screamed. How was I supposed to know she was hiding who owns what? I watched her unravel with a strange fascination. Jessica was doing exactly what I'd learned never to do in Robert's courtroom, digging deeper, instead of cutting her losses. And another thing, she continued, pointing an accusing finger at me. She's been playing games this whole time, canceling Chuck E. Cheese, throwing a last-minute party, making herself look like the hero while I look like an idiot. David slowly turned toward me, his eyebrows raised. Did you somehow cancel the Chuck E. Cheese reservation? Of course not, I said calmly and truthfully. I'm not a magician, David. Sometimes restaurants just have kitchen fires. Jessica let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, how convenient. Everything always works out perfectly for St. Margaret. You're right, I said evenly. It was convenient, almost like the universe was trying to tell you something about how you treat people. That was when Jessica finally snapped. I'm sick of this, she shouted. I'm sick of pretending to be grateful for your precious presence in our lives. You want the truth? I've hated having you here since day one. You're controlling, manipulative, and you've turned my husband and my son against me. David jumped to his feet so fast his chair crashed to the floor. That's enough. No, it's not. Jessica fired back. I want her out. I don't care whose name is on what piece of paper. This is my family, my life, and I want her gone. The kitchen fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was Tyler's voice drifting down from upstairs, happily singing some nonsense song in the bathtub, innocent, joyful, completely unaware that his world was about to shift forever. David stared at his wife, like he was seeing her for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. Jessica, 3 hours ago, my mother saved my son's birthday. She took what could have been a disaster and turned it into the best day Tyler's had all year. And instead of saying thank you, you told her to pack her bags and leave. She manipulated the whole thing, Jessica snapped. She baked a cake from scratch and decorated the house in 30 minutes while I stood there having a panic attack. David's voice rose now, sharp and incredulous. And even if she did orchestrate it, which is insane, by the way she did it to make our son happy. Jessica's face flushed red, rage blotching her skin. Your son, he's always your son when it's convenient, isn't he? Just like this suddenly became your mother's house when she wanted to throw her weight around. This has always been my mother's house, David said flatly. We just didn't know it. He dragged his hands through his hair. God, Jessica, how did I not see this? The way you talk to her, the way you treat her like she's some kind of burden. She is a burden, Jessica spat. An old woman who refuses to let go and move on with her life. That was the moment David finally broke. Get out. Jessica blinked. What? I said. Get out right now before I say something I can't take back. You can't be serious. This is my home. No, David said firmly. It isn't. It never was. And after what you just said about my mother, after the way you've treated her, he shook his head. I need you to leave tonight. Jessica turned to me. panic flooding her eyes. Margaret, please, tell him this is a misunderstanding. You know I didn't mean it. I looked at the woman who had made my life miserable for 3 years, the woman who tried to exile me from my own home, the woman who had just called me a manipulative burden in front of my son, and I smiled. Oh, Jessica, I said softly, I think you meant every word. The look of betrayal on her face was almost worth 3 years of casual cruelty. Almost, David, you can't seriously be choosing her over me, she cried. I'm your wife. You're the woman who told my mother to pack her bags and leave her own house on our son's birthday. David replied, his voice cold as January. Right now, I'm not even sure what that makes you. Jessica's eyes darted between us like a trapped animal looking for a way out. This is insane. You're both insane. I'm calling my mother. Good idea, I said mildly. Maybe she has a spare room. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, Tyler's voice echoed down the stairs. Daddy, I need help. The soap got in my eyes. David froze, torn between his child and the implosion happening in his kitchen. I placed a gentle hand on his arm. Go, help Tyler, I said. Jessica and I can finish this conversation like adults. He hesitated, then nodded. This isn't over, he told his wife before heading upstairs. The moment we were alone, Jessica dropped her phone and grabbed my arm again. Please, she whispered. I know I said terrible things, but I was upset. You ambushed me with that property information. You have to understand how shocking that was. I looked down at her manicured fingers clutching my sleeve. Jessica, I said calmly, I want you to think very carefully about your next words, because what you say in the next 30 seconds will decide whether you walk out of this house tonight with David's respecter, whether you walk out with nothing at all. She let go of my arm and took a step back. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely scared. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder. Jessica, I said evenly, I want you to think very carefully about what you say next, because the words you choose in the next 30 seconds will decide whether you walk out of this house tonight with David's respect, or whether you walk out with nothing at all. She stared at me, confused and shaken. What do you mean? I turned the phone toward her and showed her the recording that had been running since she launched into her rant about how much she hated me. I mean, I said calmly, I started recording when you began screaming about how much you despise having me here. Let me refresh your memory. Her eyes went wide as I hit play. Her own voice filled the kitchen. I'm sick of pretending to be grateful for your precious presence in our lives. You want to know the truth. I've hated having you here from day one. I stopped the recording and slipped my phone back into my pocket. I mean, I continued, that I have 3 years of documentation showing exactly how you've treated me. Tonight was just the grand finale. Jessica's face drained of color. You recorded me without my consent, she whispered. That's illegal. Actually, it's not, I replied. This is a one-party consent state, and I was part of the conversation. Any lawyer would tell you that. I smiled slightly. And thank you for reminding me that I was married to one of the best attorneys in the state. I picked up a few things over the years. She swallowed hard. You wouldn't actually use that against me, wouldn't I? I said quietly. Jessica, you just spent 10 minutes screaming about how much you hate me, how you want me out of your life, and how Tyler is more your son than mine right in front of his father, in my own home. I shrugged. I think a family court judge would find that very interesting during custody hearings. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might collapse. Custody hearings? Oh, I said gently. Did I forget to mention that David is going to divorce you? Probably not tonight. Probably not even next week. But it's coming. You crossed a line you can't uncross. I leaned back against the counter, completely calm. The real question is whether he keeps Tyler or whether you end up with shared custody. And honestly, after tonight, I'm not sure how that's going to go. Jessica dropped into David's abandoned chair like her legs had given out. This can't be happening. It is happening, I said. But here's the thing, Jessica, I'm not actually a monster. She looked up at me, stunned. Despite what you think of me, I don't want Tyler to grow up without his mother. So I'm going to give you a choice. Hope flickered across her face. What choice? You leave tonight quietly, with dignity, and without making a scene that traumatizes my grandson. You tell David you need time to process what happened, and you go stay with your mother, a friend, wherever you go when you need space. And then, she asked, and then you get therapy, I said firmly. Real therapy, not someone who just validates your feelings. You figure out why you became someone who could treat a grieving widow like garbage for 3 years. You work on yourself until you become someone David might actually want to stay married to. She stared at me. You think there's a chance? I think David loves you, I said honestly. Or at least, he loves the woman he married, but that woman isn't who you've become. I shrugged. If you can find your way back to her, if you genuinely change, maybe there's hope. And if I don't leave quietly, my smile sharpened. Then I play that recording for David, for Tyler's school counselor, for your book club friends, and for anyone else who wants to know who you really are. And when the divorce starts, I make sure everyone knows exactly how you treated the woman who opened her home to you. Jessica was crying now, silent tears streaking down her perfectly made-up face. Why are you giving me a choice? She whispered. I thought about it for a moment. Because Tyler deserves better than a bitter custody war. Because David deserves a chance to heal. I paused, surprised by my own honesty. And because, despite everything you've done to me, I still believe people can change. Even you. Footsteps on the stairs warned us David was coming. Back. Jessica wiped her face quickly and stood up. I need to pack some things, she said quietly. That's probably a good idea. She started toward the doorway, then stopped and turned back to me. Margaret, I really am sorry. About tonight, about everything. I studied her face, searching for the lie, but for the first time in 3 years, Jessica looked truly remorseful. I know you are, I said softly. The real question is whether you're sorry enough to actually change. She nodded, then headed upstairs, passing David as he came back down. He glanced between the empty kitchen and the sound of her footsteps above us. Where's she going? I handed him a cup of coffee and settled back into my chair. She's packing a bag. I think she needs some time to think about what happened tonight. David sat across from me, suddenly looking much older than his 36 years. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I had no idea she felt that way about you. I should have seen it. I should have said something. Oh, sweetheart, I said, reaching across the table and squeezing his hand. You can't protect everyone from everything. Sometimes people have to reveal who they really are before healing can even begin. We sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the familiar sounds of Tyler's bedtime routine upstairs. Eventually, David looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of his father. So, what happens now? I smiled at my son, my dear well-meaning, finally awakening son. Now, I said, we figure out how to be a family again. 6 months later, I was in the garden planting roses when Tyler came tearing around the corner of the house, his school backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Grandma, guess what happened at school today? I set my trowel aside and brushed the dirt from my hands. What happened, sweetheart? Mrs. Patterson says I'm reading at a 5th grade level, and Marcus invited me to his birthday party next weekend. He paused to catch his breath, and then Mom called Dad during lunch. My hands stilled on the gardening gloves I was pulling off. Oh, and how did that go? Tyler scrunched up his face, thinking. Dad looked happy when he hung up, but also kind of sad. Is that weird? Not weird at all, baby, I said gently. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings. Jessica had been gone for 6 months, living with her sister in Denver and going to therapy twice a week. She called Tyler every few days and had visited twice, staying in a downtown hotel and taking him on carefully supervised day trips. David had filed for separation but not divorced, not yet. Everyone was taking things one day at a time. Is Mom coming to my soccer game on Saturday? Tyler asked, plopping down beside my flower bed. I don't know, sweetheart. You'll have to ask your dad when he gets home. The truth was, Jessica had been asking to come to more and more of Tyler's activities. Her therapist had apparently told her that rebuilding trust meant showing up consistently for the small moments, not just making big gestures. It was progress, I supposed, though I wasn't entirely convinced it would last. But Tyler was happier than I'd seen him in years. Without the constant tension between his parents, he'd blossomed like a flower, finally getting enough sunlight. His grades improved. He made new friends. And he'd started calling this house home instead of Mom and Dad's house. David was different. He was a good father, working hard to give Tyler stability and normalcy. But I could see the loneliness wearing him down. Some nights, after Tyler was asleep, I'd find him sitting in the living room, staring at his wedding ring, like it held answers to questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Grandma, Tyler's voice pulled me back to the present. Are you sad that Mom doesn't live here anymore? I thought carefully before answering. Was I sad? Jessica's absence had brought peace to our home, but it had also brought David's heartbreak and Tyler's confusion. The victory I thought I wanted felt heavier than I'd expected. I'm sad that our family got broken, I said finally. But sometimes things have to break before they can heal the right way. Tyler nodded solemnly, like when I broke my arm, and the doctor had to break it again to fix it. Exactly like that. He looked up at me. Do you think our family will heal? I looked at this serious little boy who'd been through more upheaval in 6 months than most kids face in years, and my heart tightened. I think our family will be exactly what it's supposed to be, I said. It might not look the same as it did before, but that doesn't mean it won't be beautiful. The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway sent Tyler scrambling to his feet. Dad's home. I have to tell him about my reading level. He raced toward the house, leaving me alone with my roses and my thoughts. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 3 years feeling like an outsider in my own home, and now that it truly was my home again, I sometimes wondered if I'd really won the right battle. My phone buzzed, and I saw a message. James Mitchell, probably with some legal update about the property trust. So I opened it, but it wasn't from James. It was from Jessica. Margaret. I know I have no right to ask this, but could we talk? Not about David or custody or coming home. Just, could we talk? I think I owe you more than an apology. I stared at the message for a long time, listening to Tyler's excited chatter from the front yard and David's warm laughter in response. 6 months ago, I would have deleted the message without thinking twice. 6 months ago, I was focused on winning, but sitting there in my garden, dirt under my fingernails and the scent of roses in the air, I realized something important. I had already won. I had my home. I had my son's respect. I had my grandson's love. Jessica couldn't take any of that away from me anymore. What she was asking for now wasn't surrender. It wasn't negotiation. It was grace. I typed back. Saturday at 2 p.m. The coffee shop on Main Street. Her response came immediately. Thank you. Tyler came bounding around the corner, dragging David behind him. Dad wants to see your roses, Tyler announced. I told him, they're the prettiest ones in the whole neighborhood. David smiled over Tyler's head. I hear you've been working miracles out here. I looked around my garden, neat rows of vegetables, carefully tended flower beds, fruit trees finally starting to produce, months of patient work, pulling weeds, enriching the soil, learning which plants thrived where. Not miracles, I said, just time, attention, and the willingness to start over when something isn't working. David's eyes met mine with understanding. He knew I wasn't just talking about gardening. Maybe you could teach me, he said. I think I'd like to learn how to grow something beautiful. I handed him my extra pair of gardening gloves and smiled. I'd love to teach you. We have all the time in the world. And, in that garden, surrounded by my family and the flowers I'd planted with my own hands, I finally understood what victory really looked like. It wasn't about defeating Jessica. It wasn't about proving my worth or getting my way. It was about this: my grandson's laughter, my son's trust, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, when you stand your ground and refuse to let people make you smaller than you are, the universe has a way of making things right. The roses I planted that day would bloom for years to come, and so would we. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.